Imagine a time before America was officially at war, before the world knew the names Pearl Harbor or Normandy. In the skies over a forgotten front, a secret was being kept. These were not just planes, they were sharks, hunting in the clouds, and the men flying them were not soldiers of the United States Army. They were volunteers, mercenaries some called them, adventurers, American pilots, fighting a secret war for a nation that was not their own. This is the story of how a small group of daring Americans left their homes, their families, and the safety of a nation at peace to become legends. They were the first to fight. They were the Flying Tigers. The year is 1941. Long before America entered World War II, another war was raging in the East. The Empire of Japan, with its modern and powerful military, was cutting a brutal path across China. Chinese cities were bombed into rubble. Millions of innocent people were suffering. China's small air force was all but destroyed. The skies belonged to the Japanese. From the darkness of this despair, a desperate plea for help was sent across the ocean to the White House. China needed pilots, it needed planes, it needed a miracle to stop the bleeding. And President Franklin D. Roosevelt, listening in secret, decided to answer that call. The man chosen for this impossible mission was an American named Claire Chennault. Chennault was a retired U.S. Army Air Corps captain. He was a brilliant but stubborn tactician. His radical ideas about air combat had been ignored by his superiors in America, but in China, they saw his genius. Chennault believed that fighter planes could be used in a new way, not just for fancy acrobatics, but for deadly, precise attacks. He had seen the Japanese planes up close. He knew their strengths, and more importantly, he knew their weaknesses. He had a plan, but a plan is useless without men brave enough to execute it. Back in the United States, America was still at peace. The Great Depression was ending, and life was returning to normal. But for many young military pilots, life was also becoming boring. They were flying old planes in endless training exercises. The pay was low, and the chance for real action seemed a world away. It was to these men that a secret offer was made, a chance to resign from the US military with no questions asked, a chance to fly brand new fighter planes in real combat, and the pay, $600 a month. That was 3 times what they were earning. For many, it was an offer too good to refuse. The recruitment was done in shadows. Men were approached quietly. In hotel rooms and military bases, they were told they would be working for a private company, Camco, the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company. It was all a cover story, a way for the US government to help China without officially entering the war. The pilots signed their contracts. They told their families they were taking civilian jobs overseas. They were given new passports, listing their jobs as things like teacher or farmer. With a mix of excitement and fear, they boarded ships and began the long, secret journey to the other side of the world. Their destination was not China, at least not at first. They arrived in Tungu, Burma, a dusty, remote British airbase. The heat was suffocating. The culture was completely alien. This was where they would train. This was where the American Volunteer Group, or AVG, would be born. Claire Chennault met them there. He was not an easy man. He was tough, demanding, and all business. He knew they were skilled pilots, but he also knew that their American training would get them killed against the Japanese. They had to forget what they knew and learn to fight his way. And then they saw their planes, 100 Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. To the pilots, they were beautiful. They were much more powerful than the trainers they were used to. But Chennault knew the truth. The P-40 was not the best fighter plane in the world. It was heavy. It couldn't turn as quickly as the nimble Japanese Zero. In a traditional turning dogfight, the P-40 would lose every time. But the P-40 had its own advantages. It was tough. It could take a lot of damage and keep flying. It had good armor protection for the pilot. And most importantly, it was incredibly fast in a dive. This was the key to Chennault's plan. He drilled his pilots relentlessly. Never try to turn with a Zero, he would yell. You are faster in a dive. You have more firepower. His strategy was revolutionary. He taught them to fight in pairs. One pilot would attack, while his wingman protected him from above. They would use their superior altitude and speed to dive on the enemy from above, shoot, and then dive away to safety. Hit and run. Never get caught in a slow-speed turning fight. It was a completely new way of thinking. It was disciplined, and it was deadly. As training progressed, the group started to form its own identity. One day, a pilot saw a picture in a magazine of a British P-40 squadron in North Africa that had painted shark teeth on their planes. The idea was electric. Soon, all the AVG planes had the same menacing grin. It was a terrifying sight for the enemy and a huge boost of morale for the Americans. A Chinese journalist, seeing the planes for the first time, gave them a powerful name, Fei Ho, in English, the Flying Tigers. A legend was being born. Even before their first battle, life in Burma was not easy. The living conditions were basic. The food was strange. Disease like malaria was a constant threat. The men were young, and they often got into trouble in the local towns, but they also formed unbreakable bonds. They came from all over America, from different backgrounds, but here they were all the same. They were pilots. They shared the same risks and the same dreams of glory. They knew that soon the training would be over, and they would have to face a battle-hardened enemy who had never known defeat. And the enemy was getting closer. News from the outside world was grim. In Europe, Hitler's armies were marching across Russia. In Asia, the Japanese Empire was expanding. Then, on December the 7th, 1941, everything changed. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. America was officially at war. For the Flying Tigers, the news was a shock. Their secret war was suddenly part of a global conflict. They were no longer just volunteers. They were now the first line of defense, the only American combat pilots standing in the way of the Japanese advance in Southeast Asia. The wait was over. December 20th, 1941. Just 13 days after Pearl Harbor, the air raid sirens screamed over the city of Kunming, China. A formation of 10 Japanese bombers was approaching, confident and unopposed, as they had been for years. But this time, something was waiting for them. Chennault's pilots scrambled to their shark-faced fighters. This was it, the moment of truth. Years of training, thousands of miles from home. It all came down to this. The Flying Tigers of the 1st and 2nd Squadrons climbed into the sky and flew straight towards the enemy. The Japanese pilots could not believe their eyes. Where did these strange, shark-faced planes come from? The Tigers executed Chennault's plan to perfection. They dived from above, their machine guns ripping into the Japanese bombers. The bombers, caught completely by surprise, were easy targets. One after another, they exploded in mid-air or fell from the sky in flames. When the battle was over, the results were stunning. The Flying Tigers had shot down 6 of the 10 bombers without a single loss. The people of Kunming, who had lived in fear for so long, cheered from the streets below. The Tigers were heroes. While 2 squadrons defended China, the 3rd Squadron, known as the Hells Angels, was sent to a new front, the city of Rangoon in Burma. Rangoon was a critical port. It was the entry point for all Allied supplies traveling up the famous Burma Road to China. If Rangoon fell, China would be completely cut off. The Japanese knew this, and they were determined to bomb the city into submission. The 18 planes of the 3rd Squadron were all that stood in their way. The battle for Rangoon was ferocious. Day after day, massive waves of Japanese bombers and fighters attacked the city. The Flying Tigers were hopelessly outnumbered, sometimes facing odds of 10 to 1, but they fought with a skill and savagery that shocked the enemy. They dived through enemy formations, their guns blazing. They chased the enemy through the clouds and over the jungles. The skies above Rangoon became a chaotic swirl of smoke trails and falling planes. The Tigers gave no ground, and they asked for none. Men became aces in a matter of days. Pilots like David Lee, Tex May Hill, a quiet leader from Texas, showed incredible courage. In one fight, Hill's plane was riddled with bullets. His canopy was shot away. Wounded by shrapnel, he still managed to shoot down 2 enemy planes before safely landing his crippled P-40. This was the spirit of the Tigers. They simply refused to be beaten. They were proving to the world, and to the Japanese, that the myth of the invincible Japanese pilot was nothing but a myth. The pilots were the stars, but they were not alone. The ground crews worked miracles. They were a mix of American mechanics and local Chinese workers. They worked day and night, in grueling heat, to repair battle-damaged planes, rearm them, and get them back into the fight. Without fuel, or bullets, or a working engine, the pilot is helpless. These unsung heroes were the backbone of the Flying Tigers. Their dedication kept the sharks in the sky. Chennault also had a secret weapon on the ground, a massive, brilliant early warning system. It was a network of thousands of Chinese citizens spread across hundreds of miles of countryside. Armed with nothing but radios and telephones, they would watch the skies. When they spotted Japanese planes, they would report their location, altitude, and direction. This information was relayed from village to village, giving the Tigers precious minutes to get airborne and into position. It was a human radar, and it was incredibly effective, but victory came at a price. The fighting was constant and brutal. Pilots were lost, some were shot down and killed in action, others crashed due to mechanical failure, or the treacherous weather of Southeast Asia. Every loss was felt deeply. These men were more than a squadron. They were a family. They fought together, and they mourned together. The pressure was immense. Every time they took off, They knew it could be their last flight. Despite the Tigers' success in the air, the war on the ground was going badly. The veteran Japanese army was unstoppable. They pushed the British forces back, further and further. The Tigers could control the skies, but they couldn't stop an entire army. By March of 1942, the situation was desperate. Rangoon was about to fall. The Tigers were ordered to evacuate. They had held the line for months, but now they had to retreat. To fight another day, the retreat from Burma was chaos. The Flying Tigers flew their remaining planes to new bases in China. On the ground, a humanitarian disaster was unfolding. Hundreds of thousands of civilians and retreating soldiers clogged the roads, fleeing the Japanese advance. The Tigers did what they could, flying missions to protect the retreating columns from Japanese air attacks. It was a bitter end to a heroic defense. They had won the battle in the sky, but the Allies had lost the war for Burma. Now based entirely in China, the Flying Tigers faced a new set of challenges. The airfields were crude, supplies were even harder to get. Spare parts, ammunition, and even food had to be flown in over the hump, the treacherous Himalayan mountains. The pilots were exhausted. They had been fighting non-stop for months. Morale was beginning to fray, but the Japanese were still coming. The war was far from over. Chennault had to rally his tired men for the next round. One of their most famous victories in China came at the Salween River Gorge in May of 1942. A Japanese army column was advancing rapidly, threatening to cross the river and march deep into China. The Chinese army was in a desperate retreat. The Flying Tigers were called in. For 4 days, they flew mission after mission, diving into the narrow gorge, attacking the Japanese column with bombs and machine guns. They completely destroyed the Japanese advance, saving the Chinese army and stopping the invasion cold. The group was filled with characters. One of the most famous was Greg Boyington. Boyington was older than most of the pilots, earning him the nickname Pappy. He was a hard-drinking, brawling, and brilliant flyer. He became one of the Tigers' top aces, known for his aggressive, almost reckless style of flying. Though his time with the Tigers was short, he would later go on to become one of America's greatest aces of the war, leading the legendary Black Sheep Squadron in the Pacific. The American volunteer group was divided into 3 squadrons, each with its own personality. The 1st Pursuit Squadron was called the Adam and Eves, the 2nd was the Panda Bears, and the 3rd, the battle-hardened defenders of Rangoon, were the Hells Angels. They developed a friendly rivalry, competing to see who could shoot down the most enemy planes. This competition pushed them to be better, faster, and more deadly. It helped keep their spirits high in the face of constant danger. But beneath the bravado, the strain was showing. The men missed home. They wrote letters filled with a longing for a simple life, for family, for peace. They had seen more combat in a few months than most soldiers see in a lifetime. They were celebrated as heroes in the American press, but they felt isolated, a world away from the country they were fighting for. They were running on fumes, pure courage and loyalty to the man who had led them this far, Claire Chennault. While the Tigers were fighting for their lives in China, a different kind of battle was being fought in Washington. The U.S. military was now fully engaged in the war, and they were not comfortable with a private air force operating outside of their command. Generals in the War Department wanted to bring the AVG under their control. They wanted to make them part of the regular U.S. Army Air Forces. This decision, made thousands of miles away, would seal the fate of the Flying Tigers. Claire Chennault fought the decision fiercely. He knew his men. They were volunteers. They had signed up for a specific job under his command. He argued that forcing them into the regular army would destroy their unique fighting spirit. He also clashed with other American generals over strategy. They didn't understand the reality of the war in China. They wanted to fight their way, not Chennault's way. But the decision was final. The American volunteer group was to be disbanded. The news hit the pilots like a bombshell. They were given an ultimatum: join the U.S. Army or go home. To the military brass, it seemed like a simple choice, but to the Tigers, it felt like a betrayal. They had fulfilled their contracts. They had fought and bled when no one else would. Now they were being told their unique group was finished. They were being asked to give up their freedom as volunteers and accept lower pay under commanders they didn't know or trust. The reaction was not what Washington expected. On July 4, 1942, a fittingly American date, the Flying Tigers were officially disbanded. A ceremony was held. Medals were awarded by the Chinese government, but the mood was not celebratory. Of all the pilots in the AVG, only 5 chose to stay and join the new U.S. Army unit. The rest packed their bags. Their war was over. They had done their duty. They were going home. And so, just like that, it was over. In just over 7 months of combat, this small band of American volunteers had achieved the impossible. The official record was stunning. They were confirmed to have destroyed 297 enemy aircraft, with many more probable. In return, they had lost only 14 pilots in combat. They had saved cities. They had stopped armies. And most importantly, they had given hope to the Allies in the darkest, earliest days of the Second World War.